all of it is because people no longer really understand what's this thing all about. Let alone the details, the very essence and nature of Buddhist practice is a matter of great confusion now. Couldn't make heads from tails out of it. No one knows anymore. There's just confusion, and so that's why you get all this overemphasis, excessive attention to things like the behavior of monk and the outward appearance, and that, of course, is understandable as you're operating in the context of social religion. But that should never become the whole thing. Now, of course, there is a reason why the outward behavior of a mendicant, of a renunciate practitioner, could sometimes be not only at variance with community, with tradition and so on, sometimes even shockingly antisocial. And the best example of this is what we find in the stories, not so much in the Theravada tradition, but in Mahayana, in Vajrayana in particular, and also in Sufi practice, this sort of archetypal character who behaves nearly in an antisocial, insane, crazy, tradition-destructive way. He's not even regarded by people to be sane anymore. He's lost it. Now, many of these characters are venerated, sometimes in their own lifetimes and sometimes only later, as saints. In Sufism, this is referred to in Arabic as al-Magzub. This word, al-Magzub, it means someone who is attracted as if by a magnet. And he's seen to be attracted to the powers that be, to transcendental powers. And the idea of this expression, to be attracted like a magnet, is that it's not up to him anymore. Something attracts him to transcendent truth, basically, and he's completely overwhelmed by it. Now, in psychological terms, what this refers to is the actual work of a renunciate practitioner. So, not just the appearance and the outward behavior, but the actual work, which he usually does in seclusion, in the time spent privately. Now, you can have a mendicant who's on the outward level of appearance immaculate, perfect. Who knows what you do in private, whether you practice at all, whether you do the actual work at all. Nobody knows, because that's the very definition of the word private, of the word alone. But if you were to really apply yourself to practice in those long hours of seclusion and private aloneness, then as a result you'd actually very likely to experience such things as to begin to manifest in the course of time in variant behavior. Basically, what you do in that private time is that you're meeting your true self, and of your true self, or more accurately, your unconscious self, you have absolutely no control. That's Mara itself that you're meeting. And that's not a very pleasant thing, because you're discovering the truth about your innermost psyche, about your most unconscious habits and compulsions, your true karma, the thing which brings about rebirth. And that's the job. You have to unearth that. And believe me, the scenery is anything but beautiful. And this idea of control that is so glorified in the outward behavior of a monk or practicing mendicant. Now you lose every control. Now you are talking about something over which you have not the slightest control, the opposite of control. That's what the unconscious is like. And that's the true practice or work of a renunciate mendicant. It's precisely that dwelling on the psyche and on the mind and understanding them so that their unconscious foundations gradually begin to be apparent. That's the work, that's the job, and that's what's meant by avidya. This doesn't refer to ignorance of the Four Ennobling Truths. It's ignorance of your own self, it's ignorance of that which is unconscious. That's mobilizing you, it's bringing about your rebirth, it's fashioning your karma. And this is something that is it's impersonal. But there is a cost of dwelling on such things. That the unconscious is becoming too close to the surface of the conscious, because that's what practice does. Or in more experiential terms, accurate terms, the light of consciousness is reaching down. It's stable enough, it's powerful enough to reach down to all these recesses in which Mara hides, in which the unconscious lays. Now, the unconscious coming too much near this surface of the consciousness means that it will inevitably begin to express itself, not just in dreams, but also in emotional responses, in cognitive constructs of thought. And finally, out of these, into behavior. It is actually the opposite of what is commonly believed. The more you practice, the more you let go of your behavior. That's it. The more these unconscious compulsions and habits manifest themselves. There's no longer something that you are escaping from. There's no longer something that you're suppressing, and as a result, they are manifesting more and more in spontaneous behavior. I've always been saying this. A true practitioner is one whose behavior is increasingly spontaneous rather than restrained with effort. You have no option. It's not optional. It's not like, you're not trying to be impressive by being so spontaneous in a way that the general public finds to be shocking or even amusing, because some people find it that way. But what's happening is basically that you have no say about. You're not trying to interfere. You don't need to interfere anymore. And that's accompanied also by a remarkable sense of free conscience. It allows you to behave. You don't harm anybody anymore. It's been a long time since you hurt anyone. And that allows your behavior to flow more spontaneously. So the picture is sort of like inverted in the understanding of some people. Once you open up to the unconscious, all sorts of interesting things happen. But what we see in the cases of al-Magzub, in the cases of the renunciate practitioner who opens up so completely to the unconscious, is that sometimes the unconscious overwhelms the conscious mind. In other words, they lose every last sense of self-restraint and self-regulation. And that's, at this point, you basically have a madman who goes about wandering in the streets and saying things that are incomprehensible, or responding to situations of social life in ways that are absolutely shocking and antisocial. Pisses out in the street, he goes about naked, whatever they do. But people with spiritual development, or with understanding of spirituality, can see that he's not trying to be aggressive, or just not trying to shock people and make them uncomfortable. They understand that this is someone whose behavior is coming from his spiritual practice. And as a result, they actually venerate these people. They are very highly venerated in Sufi circles, in societies in which Sufism is prominent, in Vajrayana Buddhism, possibly to some extent Mahayana. I'm not really aware of that. That is very rare in the Theravada, of course, because as always, we place so much more emphasis on self-restraint and self-regulation. But I wouldn't be surprised to find instances of this. I would give the story of Venerable Angulimala as an example of this. The idea in the story of Angulimala is that the manner by which he opens up to his unconscious is that the unconscious overwhelms the psyche in a violent way. And again, once you open up, you let go. You basically stop interfering with your own behavior, with your own feelings and thoughts and life in general. You just respond. And the force of unconscious is so dominant, is so domineering, to the extent that you could either transcend it with wisdom, not with willpower, or you're completely vanquished by it. That's the point of the story of Venerable Angulimala, that he's overwhelmed by his unconscious compulsions, which makes him a villain, basically. And then all that it takes is for the Buddha to show him the way, the alternative. And with the kind of power that he already possesses, he becomes instead a saint. This is just a tiny shift, really, in the manner by which the unconscious is seen. It's not your friend, it's your enemy. And it's not even really your enemy. It's just a force, a dominant force that is so spontaneous and has its own program, its own agenda, and it wants your rebirth, it wants you dead. And that's a force of nature. It's not personal. Once you understand this, then, and only then, could you begin to transcend it. You see, through understanding, through wisdom, is what the word Buddha really means. And so, this is the job of the renunciate practitioner. This is his duty. That's what whatever that you could call the son of Buddha is doing. He takes to himself and he dwells on these sources of psyche, of the energy of the psyche, of the direction of the psyche, and with the wisdom that we have, that we learn from the Buddha, he transcends it. But that comes at a cost. He's not going to spend his time acting according to social norms and standards. That's a secondary thing. It's a thing that we have to do because we're also operating within a context of social religion, right? But what's far more important is your own deliverance, your own emancipation. Nothing is more important than this, and that requires that you take to yourself. You go into seclusion and you spend your time liberating the psyche rather than restraining it. And that happens only by means of opening up to the unconscious. And the cost of this is that not only will you be forced to sort of like embrace its energies and its wild and out of control impulses and force, but moreover, you have to be careful not to be overwhelmed by it, because this happens, and sometimes it happens in a way that ends up in psychosis. Basically, you look at a psychotic patient. Now, that's a person who's lost control. His conscious mind, the light of conscious, has become eclipsed completely, nearly, by the power of the unconscious. It's no longer about behavior. He can't control his emotions. He can't hold a thought for a minute or two. He's gone. And it's extremely difficult, of course, to handle a situation like this. So What we do is that we descend into this, and we bring the light of consciousness into these unconscious foundations, but we do it carefully, layer after another, gradually, by degrees. And the result is that, the least of your worries at this point is whether others like you or accept you or anything of that sort. You know that you're on track towards your own deliverance, and that's why you live. There's no other higher purpose or meaning or value of life for you. And so there's no way you're going to let go of this just in order to be safe and to be accepted and liked by others.